Alright, so I don't want this just to be me talking, so interaction fine. If you have a question, speak up, don't be shy. Alright, so today I'm going to talk about how to use a DSLR as a video unit, mostly for kind of what we've got here for broadcasting, as well as for feature captures like non-time sensitive stuff. So music videos, namely. Other feature stuff includes kind of cinematic stuff, or presentations, stuff that can be storyboarded, fictional stuff, etc., etc. All right, and the camera that we have here, as you guys probably know, is the Rebel T3I. It's a very, very generic kind of camera. It takes all of the basic stuff that the camera manufacturer makes, and it piles it into one. Some qualities of it are lesser than other qualities, but nonetheless, most of them still exist here. So all of the camera functions like aperture, shutter speed, film speed, or the ISO, the sensor's sensitivity to light, things like that are all going to be components of this. All right. So to start off basic, I know the general functionality of DSLR for video, but particular to this camera, I'm not 100%. All you really kind of need to know is the general base, and the rest of it falls in. So the ISO, it looks like the ISO button's right here at the top. That's not going to determine things like the color temperature, or if you're in a very if things are moving fast, you know what I mean? Like that sort of thing is going to be determined by the white balance and by, hey Caleb, and by the shutter speed. So if you speed up or slow down the shutter speed, that's going to give you a better grip on things moving fast. So things with speed and stuff. All right. The three, I don't know, you would probably call it the triangle points of photography, are shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. All right, those are the three main things that we're going to be talking about. Now, when you're shooting video with DSLRs, there's one of those components that's limited, and that is the shutter speed. So I think the shutter speed for DSLRs, or most cameras really, is between 30 and 60 frames per second, which is the exact translation to the shutter speed. So shutter speeders are, what is it? It's per second. It's 1/50th of a second, 1/100th of a second, 1/1000th of a second. I mean, if you shoot at 1/1000th of a second, that means you can get 1,000 frames in 1 second. That's exactly what that means. So frames per second on the video end is the literal translation between those two. And if you guys know anything about film, I'm sure you guys have heard various things. Cinema shoots at 24 frames per second. TV, as we see it on the network, as we watched the Super Bowl yesterday, that was on 25 frames per second. And digital purposes for like the internet and things like that, that's 30 frames per second. Right, so those are your three. There's 24, 25, and 30 frames per second. That 25 frames per second gives you that soft sort of cinematic look. 30 frames per second is sharp. That's what you see when they go out and use, say, like a GoPro for doing snowboarding videos. They shoot it at 60 frames per second, and then they edit it down, like they get the slow-mo with that wave of snow coming over the camera or whatever. They edit it down to 30 frames per second, but they've captured it in 60 frames to get all that gritty sort of high point detail, and that contrasty feel. So in any case, when it comes out at 30 frames per second, it's sharp and fast, and basically that's the kind of visual difference between cinematic and internet digital uses.
So they kind of film it like higher frames per second and then tone it down?
Yeah.
Like, do a lot of TV shows do that and things like that?
Yes, that's exactly what they do. In fact, they shoot for that and for another purpose, actually. The first purpose is so that it can go on to television, whoever buys it. Okay, but the other purpose, the ultimate purpose, is that they have the option to do so. Because if you shoot at 24 frames per second, it's
like
you can't really go up to 30. You can,
Yeah.
digitally speaking, but it's still going to be choppy and funky, and do you know what I mean?
what media do you say uses 24 frames per second?
Film.
Just like home film kind of thing? Or?
Yeah, literally the reel of film that they load up into the big can. They call them cans, and they use for, you know, Panavision, the big cameras that they use on TV sets like Hollywood sets and things like that.
Are those cans, like the things that hold the film, is that spelt the way like the film festival is? Is that why it's called that?
No. Cannes, C-A-N-N-E, that's the name of the city in France where the Cannes
okay.
Festival takes place.
That makes sense.
Yeah. But, you know, it's probably the spawn of some series of jokes that have some similar relationship. So, in any case, basics of this one are, you know, prior to even talking about the functionality of the camera, you need to know that you got to charge your batteries. All right, I mean that's key. You can't just spend all this time thinking about your interview and your lighting and where the location is and all that stuff. You also need to remember that you need at least one charged battery before you go out. My preference is that you have two, because who knows what happens, right? Maybe when you plug it in and you think it's charging, it doesn't charge, or the power goes out, or whatever. As long as you have two with you and you know one of them is charged, that's kind of like the minimum starting point. All right. The batteries on this one are very simple. All of them come with their own charger. All right. When you check these out, you have to give Berkay, or whoever's here, it's not always Berkay, a $20 deposit. They'll give it right back to you. They put it in a thing right there. They don't take it and run up a tab with it. They actually keep it.
How long do the batteries usually last? Like how much do you use?
That's a question I can't answer. There are going to be a couple of factors that determine that, though. I can.
How long do you leave it on and stuff?
Yeah, how used the battery is. I'm pretty sure that they don't actually come with two batteries, so you'd have to ask Berkay to give you another one,
Okay.
and I'm pretty sure he would. As long as he's got one and nobody's signed out or proposing to sign out one, I'm pretty sure that would be okay. So that's the battery. The other things that you're going to do outside the camera is you know, in scouting, for instance. You know, Tony noticed that the lighting was really kind of crappy at the Battle of the Bands the other day, and that one of the things that would have helped that would have been like a filter to use a wide-angle lens with a low dispersion of light, which is a coating on the lens that would allow for a quicker sort of digestion of the processor to like allow for different variants of light. There's also things like color temperature, light temperature. All of that stuff kind of comes into play when you're trying to figure out how to shape the gear bag, the stuff that you're going to bring to the location. So if you're doing interviews, like Caleb's going to do, like you guys are interested in doing with your online magazine, you're going to want at least one source of light. It doesn't have to be electronic. Okay, you can if you decide your location up front, you know that you can set it right next to a window. As long as you go the day before, you know that, say, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the sun is perfect right here. So that means that you need to schedule your interviewee to come in at 1:30, and you need to be there at 1 to set up, make sure all the lighting's good, sit yourself down, you know, or set somebody else down and make sure it's, if you need to turn the chair, do whatever you got to do. Then when the interviewee comes in at 1:30, you go over the script and whatever you're going to do. You talk about your thing. 2 o'clock rolls around. You're done in one take. Right?
Yeah.
And that's the precursor to getting good shots. If you do need electronic lighting, they do have it here. They've got some great lights. They've got eye cans. They've got like basically what I'm talking about is a large set of LED. They call them panel lights. I don't think they have any like Kino flows or long bulb lights or anything like that. But what they lack in variety, they do have good quality. So I do also have smaller versions of LED panel lights that I can loan you. These can be mounted on a very light tripod and moved very versatilely anywhere that you want them to go. There's a 3-point lighting system, but we can talk about that at the time when it necessitates that conversation. But you're definitely going to need a key light or like a fill light, and these are going to determine where your camera is based on where the light is and all that stuff. All right, so that's the pre-conversation. Now let's talk about the lenses themselves. Now this is a generic conversation that doesn't have anything to do with, say, a Rebel T3I or a Nikon D800, just any kind of camera. The lower the number of the millimeters, which is found on the top of the lens here, is going to determine how wide your frame is. All right? Why is that important?
This tells you how much you can cover with flash.
Yeah, I mean, if you're in a tight spot, you're not going to want your long angle lens and just all you're going to have is the subject's nose, right? I mean, you're going to want a nice wide angle lens. So think about where you're going to be filming. If you're going to be on a stage, if you're going to be shooting somebody on a stage, you can sit back in the crowd and use a 200mm lens and do just fine all night, right? If you're going to be behind the drummer, on the other hand, right, you're going to want to see his face, his hand, and the drum. And you're not going to have a whole lot of room between him and whoever, whatever's next to you, right? Same thing goes for interviews. If you know that you're going to be interviewing in the Oaks room, first of all, that room is going to be noisy, so you're going to need a lavalier mic on your subject, and you're going to need a wireless mic sitting back on the camera, or a shotgun mic sitting back on the camera, just to kind of get that fill sound. Some noise is good. Sometimes you're going to want the hostess in the back seating people and filling in that sound. Sometimes you're going to want the coffee person back there grinding up the beans and kind of filling that sound. That's what that shotgun mic's about.
When you have it like recording with two different mics, you can go in and whatever like editing thing and like turn down this volume, right? Like,
Indeed, yep.
Okay.
In fact, that's the purpose of two different functional mics. That lavalier mic is going to be kind of like, in a sense, it's going to be a condenser which picks up an array, but it is a bit focused in that it picks up the loudest sound first, i.e. the nearest sound first, the one that's most powerful. And that shotgun mic is what they call a cardioid or a super cardioid, which will focus sort of a beam, an unseen beam. It looks just like a shotgun, like a barrel of a shotgun. You point it at his mouth, you're going to get his voice first. It'll pick up some background, but the most prominent will be at whatever it's angled toward. You can also get condenser mics. The mic that's on this camera right now is recording the sound of the air conditioning coming out of here. And we'll be able to hear that if we put on headphones. Yeah. But for our purposes, you're going to hear my voice. You might hear a little bit of background in the coffee room next door, but it's fine. Yeah. So something to consider. We will, before you go out and shoot, just tell me what you're going to do. Tell me where you're going to be and describe the environment and the atmosphere. We can cover audio when we get there. Do not use the audio alone. The mic on these cameras is for, it just gets whatever's out there. All right, these are not designed to grab good audio. But the good news is that as long as you pick up a Rode mic, when you check your camera out, you're covered. All right, it doesn't take a whole lot to get pretty decent sound on these. As far as the Rode mic goes, there's like a miniature version of a shotgun that sits right here. This is called a hot shoe, by the way, at the top of the camera. But the mic itself is not going to be a hot shoe. The difference between a hot shoe and a cold shoe, anybody? A hot shoe means there are little terminals on this, I can't remember, the diopters or whatever, but what they do is when a Canon flash slides into place and is locked down, those four little divots touch and make the connection, and it trips the right kind of signal between this camera and the flash itself, or the light, or the mic, or whatever else is proprietary for Canon. There's some aftermarket stuff that they make, but if it says Canon, it'll work on these. Cold shoe, on the other hand, has no terminals. Right? There's no link between the item and the body. Okay, these things are things like a stand, for instance, that if I mount here and there's a stand with like two other cold shoes on it, one mounts a light and one has a directional mic on it. So you can have your hands just on the camera and not have to worry about holding the light and like having stuff on tripods and all this stuff. Have all of your stuff right here, and it expands it, but it doesn't require for electric signal and coordination between the mic and or the body and the components. So that's the difference between cold shoe and hot shoe. Cold literally means no electricity. Hot means there is some electricity going.
Does the hot light function on its own, and the cold you kind of have to manually do? Or, I mean, like the light you just kind of probably turn on and then...
Oh, I understand what you're saying. Okay. So technically, what I mean when I say hot, you would have to, if I had a strobe light, what they call a flash gun, you would need to turn it on by yourself. But it, as long as it is a Canon make, talks to the Canon and says, okay, what settings do you have? And if I zoom in, you'll actually hear that flash gun zoom in too.
Oh,
and
okay.
then focus that light. And when you zoom out, it'll bring the light closer to the front and disperse that light wider, because it knows that the lens is being zoomed in and out.
Okay, interesting.
So it actually talks to the component. It's a good question. I skipped right over that. I apologize. A cold shoe simply means that if you do that, there's no talking whatsoever at all.
Okay.
It doesn't even. It's probably not even planned to do that. And if I had my other lights here, I would show you a perfect example of that. But everything's still over there. But okay, so important things to note are that you're going to pick up a mic. You got to pick up a mic. You should pick up a second battery. And thirdly, based on your needs, you may want an additional camera or a lens. Sorry.
Okay.
All right. Depends on the use. You know what the environment requires and things like that. Now, this lens is an 18 to 55. The one that comes with, all of the T3Is that you check out, they will come with a standard 18 to 55. Now, this is your very, very basic kit lens. They call them kit lenses because they come right with the camera. You buy them off Amazon or wherever, or eBay, or they'll come right with this lens, or right with the camera body itself. Now, a wider lens is available, as well as a longer lens. A more narrow lens, a lens that is a telephoto or a zoom lens is what they call those. All right. Now, I think that here in this gear locker, we have an 8mm to 15, which is basically a fisheye lens. It's crazy wide and is not necessarily seen in the professional world as anything that you would want to use for like an interview that you guys are going to be doing. Maybe like the band, that would actually be a good application for it, actually, because it's playful, it's funny. When you look at it, you're like, it looks a bit like an IMAX. Right? It's not the way that the human eye is trained to see, and therefore it's used in very specific purposes and to get a certain effect. However, when you move up to, I think they've got a 16 to 35, then you've got a lens that does get that really, really, really wide angle, but it doesn't have so much aberration and you know, the bending of the lines to make, like if this room were shot at a wide angle like a fisheye lens, it would look bowed in the middle and fat, you know, so to speak. This lens that we have here is there's what's the word? It's not asymmetric. It's it basically means that on one side it's sort of a convex, and the other side's more flat. And so what it does is it takes the most dispersion of the area and brings it into a flat view, turns it upside down, does its thing, and magnifies it, and where the other lens elements move up and down as you turn the crank and zoom in and out, that one remains. The purpose of that first lens element is to keep things mostly straight. And that's a good lens to check out if you're in a tight sort of office space like this. Like if this was all you had and there was a wall here and a wall here and no other room, you would want a lens like that, or at least to come down to the 18mm option on this camera. Right? And that gives you that sort of wide spacing that you wanted. On the converse end of that conversation, if what you have is a very thin, long environment, I don't know how you would want that for your interview, but let's just say that that's all you've got in the strange world that this interview exists. You would want like a 200mm lens, or at the very minimum, to come out to your 55, your zoomed out length. And looking through this lens, even at the 18mm option, because this is what they call a crop frame body, you're not getting as wide as you really should. So I strongly recommend that you get that, that 8 to 16 or that 16 to, or 8 to 15 or the 16 to 35 lens when you check out the camera. All right.
Which one was the one that you said was the funny looking one?
That one's going to be your 8 to 15.
All right.
The smallest of those numbers is going to be your sort of party lens, fisheye lens. All right. What else can I tell you in the next few minutes? All right. Any questions on that stuff? Yes.
Just so are fisheye lenses like the lowest of the low in millimeters? Because those
They will be.
okay.
There really aren't. I mean, I think the lowest one I've ever seen is an aftermarket lens that goes down to like 6. But I can't imagine you get any detail out of it.
And could that be film a panorama of
It's
this basically?
Probably something like 170-degree viewpoint.
Okay.
Yeah, it covers a huge angle. GoPros cover that much, for instance, yeah. But then again, GoPros look a certain way, and you mount them on a camera or your chest so that you can get, the gauges on the motorcycle and your hands and all the motion and the dirt flying everywhere. You want all of that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. In tight situations, you could actually get away with having a GoPro as your camera and just recording separate audio, because GoPros really aren't that good at recording audio either. You could get away with that.
Yeah.
It's not really a bad idea, actually. All right, so let's talk about the functionality of the camera itself. Now, the T3Is it looks like, have an A option. An A is called auto. It's kind of a dirty word in professional photography because it just picks what you think you want. You're giving all the creative control over to the camera. Okay, that's completely auto. It determines the shutter speed, the aperture, and the ISO all by itself. What you want to do is show up early enough, and you and I are going to, with your group, determine all that stuff anyway. Mm-hmm. So we'll go through this in much greater detail. But what you're going to want to do for interviews and stuff like that, knowing where you're going, knowing if there's windows nearby, and what color temperature the lights are. When you walk into, what's the science building where all the engineers are?
Genes Hall?
Genes?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. All right, let's say you're walking in there and you're going to want to know ahead of time where, let's say student John is your interviewee. At 2 o'clock the day before, let's say you're set to film him in class Tuesday, 2 o'clock at some room in that building. You're going to want to go there at 2 o'clock the previous day. And you're going to want to look around and say, okay, we got really, really ugly, crappy lighting here. Can we do this in another room? That's the first thing you want to determine. And if you can, go into that room and find out where it's at, the lighting conditions. The reason that you want to know where the room is in the building is because if it's on the outside wall, then you're talking about mixing fluorescent light with sunlight. The prettiest light, the light that presents human flesh tones in the best possible way, is sunlight. And that's at 5600 Kelvin. All right? When you start degrading that light temperature, then you start getting into just funky colors. And if my white balance is on point on my camera, then I'll have my normal flesh tones, even though these lights aren't 5600. These are somewhere around 2800 to 3000. These lights, and you just look blue in them if you're not white balanced. So in any case, you're going to want to determine what your light spectrum is in your interview of choice, the location, and then that's when you get into white balance. So on this one, if I switch over to manual, your white balance, it looks like it's set for auto white balance. So the arrow up button right here on the back, your little dial button, when you push the up, it goes to AWB, which is auto white balance. Now, if you have mostly sun coming through that room, say you're in a sunroom, for instance, and there's a couple of lights that are, on, if the most of the power, the light power in the room is coming from the sun, just flip it over to sun. If it's half and half, you can flip it over to cloudy, and it might do okay if you know that all you're going to have is the fluorescent light. Flip it over to fluorescent light, and what it'll do is its best job at making you not look like a dying alien. Right? Now, the next one over from that is tungsten. Tungsten is it's also known as like incandescent. The two aren't necessarily technically interchangeable, but when speaking about lighting, you can interchange these two terms. And that's because they reside at about the same temperature scale. That's about a 3200 Kelvin. Now, tungsten makes things look yellow. These are the lights that you see out when you're driving on the road. They have a tungsten filament, but there's like phosphorus in them. There's all kinds of funky little chemicals that change up the light quality. You're just going to need to know that. You're going to need two people to go with you, because you're going to want person A behind the camera and person B checking the camera quality out. So you're just going to run through those settings, see which one works best for you, and select it. All right, so for this room, we would go with what?
Fluorescent.
Yes. So flipping it over to fluorescent. All right, now before we talk about shutter speed, let's talk about aperture. Aperture is the size of the iris of the lens, the opening of the lens itself, and this determines how much light hits the sensor when the shutter is open. Not how long the shutter is open, which also determines how much light, but how much light itself when the shutter trips.
Are there lenses that make that, like, maybe they have like a certain tint to them so that they intensify light in a really low light situation?
There are filters that do the opposite of that.
So they de-intensify light?
Yes, and those are called sort of like neutral density filters. There are blue filters, red filters, yellow filters. There are all kinds of different filters. The neutral density filter, the reason that it goes in the opposite direction is because if you do that, then you can open up the aperture really, really wide, or let the shutter speed lag for longer, which would normally oversaturate all of the light. But since that dial is on there, since the filter's on there rather, then it tones that down and still gives you the quality that you want with different settings.
Okay.
So it does exactly what you're kind of asking,
But just the
in the other direction. Yeah, I mean it works kind of counterintuitively, but this is how you get that amazing sunset shot. You know, if you point a camera right at the sun, it's going to be like, you're not going to get the light in the foreground that you want. You're only going to see the sun.
Right.
But if you put that neutral density filter on there, which comes in 4 different gradations, you can, and some of them are even graded based on where on the lens they are. So if you put like the lower half of it would be no filter, and it has a gradation up to 100% neutral density filter, right? And halfway down is kind of like where it stops. You would point that halfway mark at the horizon of the sun. It would kill all that bright, crazy light and just get the nice saturated tones and good, cool, like yellow and red hues coming off the clouds, but then it wouldn't burn all the sand and water in the foreground. They make lenses specifically for all those shots. So, and I think we actually have filters here. The size of the front of the lens determines the filter you need. So I would, even if I had filters, I'm not guaranteed to have the ones that you might need for your lens. So just check with Berkay about those. Good question, though. All right. Yeah, if you guys need anything, feel free to step out. All right. Again, before we get into the shutter speed, I'm going to go ahead and talk about autofocus. Autofocus is kind of a no-no in an interview situation because things change. And you're not always going to know, what's happening. If you're walking around with your subject, it might be a good idea to just keep your hand up here. Okay, this is your zoom on the back, and this is your focus up here.
Okay.
If you have an internal mic, right, and you like half down on the trigger here, what that's going to do is going to focus, but you're going to hear it. You're going to hear this And like these just annoying little sounds that get in the audio there. Really, really, really just ruins the audio. If you have an external mic, it doesn't hear it as much, but you still kind of hear it.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so that's the reason that you're just going to want to have, you're going to want to hold the camera just like this the whole time. And you're going to look at the viewfinder, and you're just going to be like, oh, he's not in focus, and now he's in focus. And that's it.
Okay.
Right? That's all that conversation needs to be too, because it's pretty obvious. Once you get in that situation, you're gonna ruin one shot and you'll never forget it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you have to redo it or flush it.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so now that Kayla's back, let's talk about the shutter speed, okay? So shutter speeds on cameras themselves for stills go from bulb, which you can leave open for 30 seconds. You can leave a camera's shutter open for 8, 10, 12 hours if you want, and get the movement of the stars across the overnight.
Some people get those like traffic pictures, right?
Yeah. Well, that you can leave them for 4 or 5 seconds open for that. But the really, really the epic shots that you can actually see the outline of the Milky Way,
Yeah.
that's like an hour-long shot. That one is the sensor doing nothing but bringing in light, even the light that's not visible to the human eye, right? So that's bulb. Then there's, 10th of a second and 15th of a second and all these things up to, I think, 8,000ths of a second. And let's see how high this one goes. This one goes as high as 4,000th of a second. You will never be able to use that in video, though. Never. There's only like 3 fractions of a second that you're going to be able to use in video. And they are 30th, 40th, 50th, and 60th. So 4 on this one. And I doubt it'll even allow you to do 40th of a second. I doubt it. I think it'll probably only allow you to do 30th and 60th.
Is the shutter speed what determines the frames per second?
Yes, the exact same number. I don't think you were here for that at the beginning when we talked about it, but that's the literal, exact, precise same number.
Okay. So if it's 1/30th of a second, is it 30 frames per second, or is?
Yep.
Okay.
So
There's no math in that one. It's like the only thing in photography that you don't have to actually do any math in.
so if you shot at 1/50th, would you go 25 frames per second?
No, what I mean when I say you can't do that is that I don't think the camera would allow you to.
Oh, okay.
I'll turn it on and try and do it in a second, and I'll prove myself wrong. I have no doubt. But my assumption up front is that you only would be able to do the 25, like 1/25th, 1/30th, and 1/60th. And I don't even know if it goes to 1/25th, actually. It does. Okay, so you might actually be able to shoot 25th, 30th, and then pop it up to 60th. And if it's a good camera, it'll go to 1/20th, which this one doesn't seem to have. It has 100th and 1/25th. It might shoot at 1/20th, which is, you'll notice there's something very particularly unique about these numbers. 30th is half of a 60th, 60th is half of a 1/20th.
Mm-hmm.
And they do the math on purpose because they know where it's going to end up. It's going to end up digitally because it's being shot digitally.
Right.
From there, you can drop down to 1/25th and use it for cinematic uses.
Right.
But it's captured in 1/30th.
All right.
That's my assumption. I'm going to try it in a second. We'll figure it out. Now, I have never actually made a video with the T3I, but again, almost all SLRs are going to be the same in that note. We'll start out at 30th. And for this room, I'll go with I think I might be able to go as low as I messed it up. As low as like a 4.5, maybe a 3.5. So how do I set? Okay. All right. ISO, I'll go with these are very. All right. ISO. There we go. I'll go with like an 800th. And I'll probably be overcompensating, but you can actually adjust that kind of stuff when the video is rolling. All right. Let's give you a live view. All right. So where is the record button for this? There's got to be an actual record button on here.
I think it's right on the front. Or not, I mean, not on the front. It's just that.
Well, that's giving me live view, but it doesn't look like it's recording it. I wonder if there's a card.
Oh, are you on?
Card in there.
Are you on video?
Oh, good call. Yep.
Because I'm pretty sure that's the record button while you're on video.
Okay. Nope, you're totally right. All right. So what we're going to make sure we do is we turn the stabilizer can be on. That's not going to make a lot of noise. All right. But the focus, you want that off. You want to move it from AF, which is autofocus, to MF, which is not. It's manual. There you go. And you're going to want to just basically set the camera right in your hand like that. This hand can do kind of whatever it wants. It's more than likely going to be here just to stabilize it. But this one is going to be here because you want to keep your eye here. You keep half an eye up, but you're mostly going to want to keep your eyes on the display here so that you can frame up your subject and that you can make sure that if your subject moves, you keep him in focus all the time. Nothing worse than getting somebody out of focus. You can do it right? You can use that selective focus maneuver and sort of like you focus on your subject and then you focus on like the picture behind him for a second. If you're like, you know, my wife, she died back in '93. It was the worst day of my life. And you can change focus while he's talking about his wife, right to that image of his wife on the back of the wall, and then move the focus back on him by the end of the sentence. You can do that if you plan ahead well enough on that sort of thing. Or you can just ask him to repeat it. He won't know what you're doing. You'll just adjust the focus while he's talking, and everything's kind of covered. And then when you're in post-production, it's like, ooh, that came out awesome. You got to be careful, but you can pull stuff like that off. So, all right, you were right. When you see the red button on the display, that means you're recording.
Yeah.
Red does not mean stop in video. Red means record. Because, and I feel it's very important to say that because most people say, oh, red, I must mean stop. I need to like hit that again because it means stop. It means something's wrong. People see red and they're like, oh, it means, you know, don't go here, or, you know what I mean? That's what we apply to red. So if you don't know anything about cameras, red means record. R for red, R for record. It also means if the band is playing and you're not red, then you're not going to go home with any footage. So, all right. So that is indeed the record button. I think they put it on the back instead of up here so that you don't confuse where your fingers are. That's the way mine works as well. And to switch it over to video, it is the dial, as Tony pointed out, up here. So you can switch from stills to, you know, speed and portrait and landscape and all kinds of other stuff. But if you're not on camera, I think camera also automatically gives you the live view. So as soon as you switch, the dial over, it will point to the lens. There's a couple of things on the display that are important to note. On this, we have ISO down here, and if I take my finger off this trigger, by the way, this is what's bringing that display up. I'm not going to actually, if I touch it, I don't know what. It actually takes a still frame. It actually does.
And it interrupts your video.
It probably does.
It'll. I think last time I filmed, I remember it would interrupt your video, take the picture, restart your video, and so you have this like couple-second gap.
Yeah.
Strange.
You would think they would have thought ahead about that and just not make that feature. All right. So anyway, if you push half, I'll say, down on this, all right. It's a very good technique to know anyway. If you're dealing with cameras, pushing halfway down just to trip that will also initiate your autofocus. So if you're just trying to tap in on something, you know, you're not going to push all the way down. You'll feel it. It'll go in and then stop, and then you'll intuitively know that if you push it any further, it will trip the shutter or whatever.
Yeah.
So if you push that halfway down, it will give you the display. It's going to make me a liar now. So I've got 3.0 over here, which undoubtedly means 30 frames per second, and then I've got ISO 400. So I set it at 800. It kicked it back down to 400, probably because that's the only option that it has. It's limited to a small range of things. All right. Now, I'm willing to bet that if I turn this dial, okay, all right, it does not go down below 30. So it will not go to 25. I can't remember if I assumed it wouldn't or not, but I'm pretty sure I doubted it.
Yeah, you did.
All right, so turn around for this one. So if you guys can see, if I can dial it up though, and it'll go to 40, 50, 60, and then 80. Wow, it goes to 100, 125, 160. Wow.
Are you changing the ISO? Or?
No, I'm changing the frames per second.
Oh.
It continues to go up, but it's not going to do any good.
I see 50. It looks like on the left, or maybe that's.
Yeah, that's 5.0, which is the
Oh.
which is how open the aperture is.
Oh, okay, that's a different thing.
Aperture is it? Let me see if I can. Doesn't really have a. It should have a menu option. Here we go. Okay, so you've got a shutter and AE lock, which is good. Probably not necessary for what we're talking about, though. Audio recording grid, exposure compensation. Exposure compensation is on here, but all right, we'll stick with the basics for now. Your shutter, your aperture rather, needs to be set prior to turning this on, and I'm pretty sure you can just do that over in manual. So it's at an f5. Do you know how to change the aperture on these, Tony?
I think you
Just pop over. So I'm gonna do that.
I think you can you hold it, you hold something down and adjust something else. Now you hold it.
Yeah.
Oh, where'd the menu go?
We're in manual. Oh, that's not the right menu, is it? Display. There it is.
Oh,
Okay. Display.
so
It could be.
I was
one of
like,
the-
I'm gonna put it in my hand.
Oh, that's your AF selection. That's important to note.
Yeah, so you hit that button and then you use the wheel.
Yep, good enough. All right. So there's a button called AV, and there's a plus minus, which looks like it actually could be an EV, which is exposure value. But anyway, you hold that down, and it moves over to here for the time that you hold it down. So if you let it go, it comes back.
Oh, yeah.
And this dial up here is what it's asking you to change. All right. So without holding it, and you just change the dial, it will go up in shutter speed. And it will go as low as 30. Well, you can probably put it at 1/10 of a second, but when you switch it back over to video mode, it'll just go to the lowest setting, which is probably 30. It'll probably go to the lowest setting, which is definitely 30. And then so anyway, you hold this guy down, and it'll go, ooh, it won't go any lower. If you find that you are not being allowed to go any lower, bring the lens back to its lowest setting, which is 18 mils, all right? And then it'll allow you to go down as far as it can go, which is at this point 3.5. Now 3.5 is a very wide aperture, relatively speaking. For this lens, it's the widest it'll go. Now that 16 to 35 in there, that much heavier glass, you'll feel an immediate difference if you pick it up. That one probably, I'm willing to bet goes down to a 2.8 and stays at a 2.8 all the way out to 35 millimeters. This one goes down as low as 3.5, but when you start zooming it in, and you'll probably see it change here. Oh, it didn't change. It will not stay at 3.5. It'll go up to 5.6 when it's zoomed all the way out. All right, so you need to remember that because, you know, when you have it set, you're like, okay, I got good light in this situation. We're set to go. I set the camera. We're all good. But then when Joe's student decides that he wants to talk about something on the other side of the room where the light's different, you need to remember that, well, if I need to zoom in because he's walking away from me, that's going to change my light settings. Okay?
Okay.
What settings are the most important when you're either filming or taking pictures in Zoom?
In zoom, well, no matter what you're doing, there are those three main components are always the most important: the aperture, the shutter speed, and your ISO.
So, like, I guess where would the aperture and where would the shutter speed, and where would you want them when you're filming far away?
Far away. Okay, so if you're at a zoom at, how far are we talking?
Say 50 times.
So, well, something like 100 feet away?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, so you're going to want, depending on if it's like just a person, you probably want like, the standard sort of starting point for a telephoto is a 200 millimeter lens. A good one will be, will have the capability to maintain a 2.8 aperture all the way out to whatever it goes to. I've got a 70 to 200 Nikon. It's like an old, doesn't even, it's like pre-VR. And it does a phenomenal job at that low light dispersion because it stays at 2.8 all the way out when I zoom out to 200. The aperture will remain at 2.8. You're going to want to keep it like that. It all depends on other various conditions, but I'll speak very generally and say that we'll say we have optimum light, midday. It's a clean shot with very little distraction and not a whole lot in the background, so that we can take wherever they're at, as long as they stay where they're at and they're not going to move and, you know, toward or away from you, so that your depth of field is going to keep them in focus correctly and everything like that. We'll say that the settings should be on a regular day with decent light. There's something called the Sunny 16 rule, and the Sunny 16 rule is it goes in a series of 4s. Okay, so f4, 400th of a second. I'm sorry, not sorry. ISO of 400, an aperture of f16, and a shutter speed of 400th of a second. So that's the Sunny 16. So 4 times 4 equals 16. And that's how they kind of came up with that theme. Now, if you start there in your head and say, okay, 20 minutes ago it would have been the Sunny 16 rule, but now we got a lot of cloud cover, then you're going to want to change those things. You're going to want to either drop the aperture down to like an f10 and keep everything else the same, or if it's come way down, then you want to drop the aperture way down as well. But when you do that, when you drop the aperture down several steps, you want to compensate in some way. Either the ISO needs to change, or the film speed needs to change. And
so it should kind of float somewhere around that 16. We make adjustments based on
how it changes.
Yeah. Okay.
The Sunny 16 is the optimum light option.
Yeah.
It's like perfect light, no problems. You just kind of say, okay, well, it's a little bit less, so maybe we'll just go 2 stops down. Stuff like that. But luckily in film or video, we'll say, you know, you're limited to, one of your options is limited, meaning you're only going to have a 30th of a second. So you know that really you only have 2 other adjustments that you can make, the ISO or the film speed, or the shutter speed, rather. And that's basically it. Without giving any real examples, that's a good conversation. So you're checking your watch. You got someplace you got to be?
No, not quite.
All right. Well, I don't want to keep you from doing your thing. Because
no, I don't have anywhere to be. But okay. I just do that out of habit. That'd mean to be rude.
If you're in a presidential debate, that'll ruin you.
Yeah. So I was trying to check out a few of them so I could have these in hand when I was talking, but I'll have this video online for Anish and Tig as well. Just make sure that they know.
Yeah.
I'll send you a link. I guess I'll just send everybody a link.
Cool.
We'll go from there, and that'll be kind of like the just quick intro. I'll kind of stop it there, but then when we get these in your hands, obviously more questions are going to crop up. I'm going to try and cover low, medium, and high light situations whenever we get to doing this thing in here. We can even do like a mock-up, like an interview. We can do a mock-up sort of band situation. We just have a guy pretending to hold a guitar, and we just change the light on said individual. And we'll just, all of us will have one of these, and we'll go through a whole session like that.
That'd be really helpful.
So like just to kind of like broadly go over it again, like shutter speed is shutter speed. Like the aperture is. How does that like relate to the shutter speed?
It's like the iris of an eye.
Iris.
It lets light in.
Okay, so that's related to the light and the millimeters that we talked about and all that.
Yeah, that's the actual, the millimeters is the focal length of the lens itself. That's not controlled here, it's controlled from the lens.
Mm-hmm.
But let me back up a second. What he said was very important. The iris of your eye, if you look right into the light, what does your eye do? Your pupil dilates, right? And it does the exact same thing on a camera, or it needs to do the same thing on a camera anyway. You're the one, however, that is going to be dilating it.
Okay.
But that's a good thing and a bad thing. Sometimes it works out in your advantage, where you need to like kick some of the light out, and sometimes you need to bring some of the light in, and that's a very good way to think of it as an iris.
Okay, yeah.
In fact, it's called an iris when we switch over to video.
Yeah.
So the other part of your question was, how does that relate to the shutter speed? Okay, so one of them it does not move, right? The iris does not move as the film is being made, as the picture is being taken.
Mm-hmm.
But the shutter, however, does. In DSLRs, SLR actually stands for single lens reflex, meaning single lens reflects the light into a pentaprism, and then you look through here, and I'm literally looking through the exact same thing. I see what the lens sees. Not all cameras do that. Some cameras are what they call viewfinder lenses, and in which there's really no pentaprism, there's nothing reflecting. You just look through here, and it gives you a square, basically looks right through a square in the front of the camera, but it focuses you in, and so I'm about, it gives you kind of like maybe what your frame is going to look like at the end.
Mm-hmm.
It's a close shot. At the worst case scenario, you're going to get more than what you need, and to just crop in post-production. Okay. And the other kind of lenses that we have now are things like mobile phones, where you just point it and you can see what you're looking at. This one has a display that pops out, and you can see it here.
Yeah. Right.
And a lot of them also are called mirrorless lenses, and that's pretty much where everything's going anyway, is mirrorless lenses.
Okay.
Because they're lighter, you don't have to have this mechanical sort of lo-fi pentaprism sitting in this big thing that makes a brain out of your camera.
Yeah.
And how those two relate are, they basically balance. They need to balance each other out. Okay, so let's say that you're set already at an ISO of 400. You have a shutter speed of let's go 250, and an aperture of say f10. Plenty of light outside. Your 250 needs to change because now you've got a bunch of kids playing in the background, and you want to freeze them. You want to catch them in motion, but you don't want them blurring across the screen. So what do? What would you imagine if you're sitting at a 250 and an f10? 250th of a second and f10. Now 250 isn't slow, mind you. I mean, you're probably still going to freeze them, but if you want to make sure that they're nice crisp edges on the movement and things like that, would you go down or up? You only have two options.
Down, I think. Well, to get all the little details and everything, yeah, probably go higher because you can capture more.
Right? You would go to say like a 400th of a second or a 500th of a second, and that'll freeze them right in time. If you're doing something faster, say like a horse is running down a field or something, and horses kick up dirt and their tail fans in the wind, you want to catch all of that, right? It's not just the animal. You want to catch the environment, right? Like the essence of the movement. And then you want to crank it up to 1,000th of a second, maybe 2,000th of a second.
Okay.
But you have to change your aperture to do that. Or you have to change your ISO, because then what you're doing is you're cutting that amount of light in half, a third, a quarter.
Mm-hmm.
And if you shoot it like that, if you don't change anything else and all you do is you crank it up to 400th of a second, you're cutting that light in half from a 250th to a 400. That's literally if it was a 200th of a second to a 400, that would be half the amount of light.
Okay.
Mathematically speaking.
Mm-hmm.
So then your image would be half as light. So you take that same shot and you look at it in post, and you're like, you know, I can't even see the horse, or I can see him, but it looks like it's in a shadow or something.
Yeah.
So then you have to adjust your iris to open it up a little bit more, to let in more light to compensate for that time frame.
Okay.
Or you have to tell the sensor inside the camera to be more sensitive to that light.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're sitting at a 400 ISO and you go up a full stop to 400, what do you need to do to your ISO? You divide it by 2 or you multiply it by 2?
What was the
Okay, so
scenario?
all right, so if you're at 200th of a second,
Mm-hmm.
and you double or you half the time that the shutter's open at 400th of a second, that means the shutter's open half as long.
Yeah.
That means you need twice as much light, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so now your ISO is at 400. Where does it need to go? Does it need to go down to 200, or does it need to go up to 800?
So you need twice as much light,
Mm-hmm.
and you're at 400, so you want to go down to 200.
No.
Let in more light?
It'll sort of digest more light.
Okay.
Yeah. If you go down to 200, then the camera thinks that you have more light, not that you need more light.
Oh.
So 800
Oh, right.
means more sensitive
Okay, yeah.
than before.
Double that. Yeah, I see. Yeah.
All right? It's counterintuitive.
Right, it's like the
tricky.
thing he was talking about.
Yeah. It doesn't work the same way. So if I go from 800 to 1600, it's twice as sensitive. From 1600 to 3200, it's twice as light sensitive
Mhm.
as it was before.
Okay.
All right? So, but if I go from ISO 400 to ISO 200, that means the camera thinks that there's just more sun out.
Right. Okay.
All right?
Cool. Okay.
Once you kind of like start working with it, it starts to click more, and because once you like start working and like changing the shutter speed, changing the aperture, you'll start to see how they work together. And
Yeah.
I was where you were, where it gets a little easier once you start actually working with it.
You know, I taught for the first 2 weeks of my last class last semester, I taught just this concept, and it's a very hard one to digest. So what I'll do, if you're interested, I recorded all of those sessions. If you want, I'll just give you access to that blog,
Okay.
and you can watch the first few weeks of classes. And I mean, there's things that I do in that class that I can't do here. I mean, for instance, I have the projectors on, and I have some slides,
Mhm.
and you can write on the walls in that room in there, as you clearly see people have done in here.
Oh, yeah.
And but there's something called the focal, what is it? The focus triangle, or the light triangle, I think is what they call it. And what it basically does, it's a graphic that says there's 3 points of a triangle, right? It's an obtuse triangle, or it's an acute triangle on all sides.
Mhm.
But if you decrease one, you know, then this side goes out. So you need to bring this back in and that back in to make it equal again,
Yeah.
to make it keep the same proportions, so to speak. And so on each side you've got, you know, aperture, ISO, and shutter speed.
Gotcha.
Right. In addition to those, tertiary to those are lenses, white balancing, lighting, you know, of mechanical or natural sources, things like that.
Mhm.
And that all of those things need to be, you know, maintained in the back of your mind, but certainly the ones inside the camera, those 3 are the most important.
Mhm.
So unless you guys have any more questions, I mean, that's as basic as I can get it. I know that just talking about it's not fair to you, so I apologize that we can't get our hands on it, but we will. I promise. We're going to start doing all that stuff. Why don't you guys send out an email to Tig and Anish and coordinate an interview, and I will use that as an opportunity to meet back with everybody that's interested in video, and we'll do a full shebang. You know,
Okay.
we'll set up lights, we'll do a 3-point lighting system. I'll tell you what the lights are, how do people refer to them on the set, studio conditions for lighting, having multiple cameras. We'll do all of it.
Awesome.
Break it all out.
Sweet. Thank you.
Aight.
Good.
Thanks for meeting, guys.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll see you. We still have class. I'll see you Wednesday.
Yeah.